It was a cold, moonless night when I received an order that sent a chill down my spine. The customer's name was simply listed as M. The address was a dilapidated house at the edge of town, a place I had heard whispers about from locals. They said it was cursed, haunted by something sinister. But I brushed off those superstitions, thinking they were just tales meant to spook gullible minds. As I navigated my way through winding streets, the oppressive darkness seemed to grow thicker around me. An eerie stillness hung in the air, broken only by the occasional gust of wind. The address finally came into view, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over me. The house loomed before me, its windows shattered and its exterior coated in a thick layer of grime. The front porch sagged, as if it had given up on holding itself together. I parked my car in front of the house, my headlights casting long, ominous shadows across the cracked pavement. With the food bag in hand, I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to proceed. But the thought of the money I'd earned for this delivery spurred me on. I made my way to the front door and knocked, my knuckles rapping against the decaying wood. Seconds felt like hours as I waited, the silence pressing down on me like a lead weight. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, gaunt figure standing in the doorway. His skin was ashen and his eyes were shrouded in darkness. He wore a tattered robe that hung loosely from his skeletal frame. "Delivery," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were navigating through a dream. He beckoned me inside, and I reluctantly stepped over the threshold into the house. The interior was just as decrepit as the exterior, with peeling wallpaper and a musty smell that seemed to cling to the walls. He led me down a narrow hallway, and my footsteps echoed ominously on the creaking floorboards. We entered a dimly lit room at the end of the hall, where a single, flickering candle illuminated a table covered in strange symbols and arcane writings. The air was heavy with an oppressive energy that made my skin crawl. The man gestured for me to place the food on the table. I obliged, my hands trembling as I set the bag down. As I turned to leave, I noticed movement in the shadows, something lurking in the corner of the room. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a grotesque, contorted figure half hidden in the darkness. Panic set in, and I bolted for the door. But before I could reach it, the man's bony hand shot out, gripping my wrist with an iron grip. He pulled me back into the room and the door slammed shut behind me, sealing my fate. "Stay," he hissed, his voice a guttural whisper that sent shivers down my spine. I watched in horror as the grotesque figure emerged from the shadows. It was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen, its body a twisted amalgamation of limbs and contorted features. It moved with an unnatural grace, its eyes fixed on me with a hungry, malevolent gaze. Terror coursed through my veins as I realized that I was trapped in a nightmare. The man and the creature were working together, and I was their unwilling guest. I knew then that I had to escape, to fight for my life. Summoning every ounce of strength, I wrenched myself free from the man's grasp and made a desperate dash for the window. Glass shattered as I crashed through it, landing in a heap on the overgrown lawn outside. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted to my car, never looking back. I sped away from that accursed house, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had narrowly escaped something unspeakable that night, something that defied explanation or reason. As I drove, I couldn't help but wonder what dark forces had been at play in that house, and what twisted purpose the man and the creature served. To this day, I can't erase the memory of that disturbing food delivery from my mind. It haunts my dreams, a constant reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the shadows, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim. And as I continue to work the night shift, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever encounter something as sinister and nightmarish as I did that fateful night. The night was cloaked in an eerie stillness as I embarked on another late-night food delivery. My job as a food delivery driver had led me to some strange places, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me on this particular evening. The order that came in was unlike any other I had seen. The customer's name was listed as The Hollow, and the address led me to a remote, desolate mansion on the outskirts of town. The building was a relic from a bygone era, a sprawling Victorian mansion with ivy-covered walls and windows that seemed to stare out into the void. As I pulled up to the mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air felt heavy, and a palpable sense of dread hung in the atmosphere. But I needed the money, so I gathered the food and made my way to the front door. The mansion's entrance was grand and imposing, with a set of massive wooden doors that groaned as I pushed them open. The interior was a labyrinth of ornate hallways and dimly lit rooms, each one seemingly more foreboding than the last. I followed the directions provided to me, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The mansion appeared abandoned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The walls seemed to whisper with long-forgotten secrets, and the shadows danced menacingly in the corners of my vision. Finally, I reached the designated room. The door stood slightly ajar and a faint light flickered from within. I cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside, revealing a scene that sent a chill down my spine. The room was adorned with an array of candles that cast a sickly yellowish glow. Their flickering flames illuminated an elaborate dining table set for one. The table was covered with an assortment of silverware, fine china, and crystal glassware. It was a surreal sight, as though someone had prepared for a grand feast in the heart of this decrepit mansion. I approached the table, feeling a growing sense of unease. The food, if you could call it that, was laid out before me. Plates held what appeared to be an assortment of grotesque, otherworldly dishes, slimy, wriggling tentacles, and unidentifiable, pulsating masses of flesh. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that there was no way this could be a legitimate order. It was as if I had stumbled into a nightmarish ritual, a feast meant for something beyond human comprehension. As I turned to leave, a voice, cold and hollow, echoed through the room. "Sit." I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice seemed to emanate from all directions, and I couldn't determine its source. It was a command that I couldn't disobey, and I slowly lowered myself into one of the ornate chairs. The candles flickered and danced as if in response to the unseen presence in the room. The air grew colder, and I could feel an invisible force pressing down on me, holding me in place. Suddenly, the room seemed to come alive. The grotesque dishes on the table began to writhe and move as though they were alive. I watched in horror as they slithered and squirmed, their grotesque forms defying all reason. The voice continued to echo through the room, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. It was a malevolent incantation that seemed to summon something from the darkest depths of the unknown. As the abominations on the table drew closer, I closed my eyes, praying for an escape from this nightmare. In that moment, I realized that I had stumbled upon a malevolent force, something ancient and unfathomable, and that I was nothing more than a pawn in its twisted game. To this day, I can't erase the memory of that horrifying night. The mansion still stands as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places, and I can't help but wonder if I will ever encounter something as haunting and inexplicable as I did that fateful evening. It was well past midnight when I received the order, and the address sent a shiver down my spine. The customer's name was a single letter, X, and the address led me to an old, abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. I couldn't help but think it was a cruel prank, but the promise of a hefty tip compelled me to go against my better judgment. As I navigated the winding, overgrown path leading to the asylum, the sense of unease grew with each passing moment. The building loomed like a fortress of despair, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. It was said to be haunted, a place where unspeakable horrors had occurred in the past. But like a moth drawn to a flame, I continued onward. When I arrived, the night was eerily quiet. No crickets chirped and no wind rustled the trees. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate me. Summoning my courage, I knocked on the massive wooden door. It creaked open with a painful groan, revealing a dimly lit hallway that disappeared into darkness. My flashlight revealed the remnants of a long-forgotten institution, with rusty gurneys and tattered patient gowns strewn about. A figure emerged from the shadows, clad in a hooded cloak that concealed their face. I couldn't discern their gender or age, only the glint of their eyes in the dim light. They gestured for me to follow them deeper into the asylum. Reluctantly, I complied, my footsteps echoing through the eerie silence. The cloaked figure led me to a room at the end of the hallway, where a table was set with fine china and flickering candles. It was an odd sight in such a decrepit place. On the table lay the order I had delivered, a feast of exotic and unsettling dishes. Plates were filled with unidentifiable meats, and strange fruits and vegetables adorned the table. The air was thick with an overpowering, sweet scent that made my stomach churn. I cautiously placed the food on the table, my unease growing with each passing moment. The cloaked figure remained silent, their eyes never leaving me. It was as if they were studying my every move. As I turned to leave, a voice, cold and chilling, cut through the silence. "Stay." I froze in place, my heart pounding. There was an unspoken command in that voice, one I couldn't ignore. I turned back to the figure, unable to tear my gaze away. Suddenly, the room came alive with movement. The candles flickered and danced as if possessed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The cloaked figure began to chant in a language I couldn't comprehend, and the food on the table seemed to writhe and squirm of its own accord. Then the unthinkable happened. The food began to transform, contorting and morphing into grotesque, nightmarish shapes. The meats writhed and slithered. The fruits and vegetables twisted into monstrous forms. Terror gripped me and I tried to flee, but an invisible force held me in place. I could only watch in horror as the abominations on the table came to life, their hideous forms moving with a sickening grace. The cloaked figure continued its incantation, its voice growing louder and more menacing. It seemed as though they were summoning something from the depths of the abyss itself. In that moment, I knew I had stumbled into a nightmare beyond comprehension. The asylum was no longer abandoned. It was a gateway to something malevolent and otherworldly. As the abominations on the table closed in on me, I closed my eyes and prayed for a miracle. In that room of horrors, I couldn't help but wonder if this would be my final delivery, a feast for something far darker and more insatiable than any human appetite. To this day, I can't shake the memory of that dreadful night. The asylum still stands, a sinister relic of the past, and I can't help but wonder what eldritch horrors continue to lurk within its decaying walls, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim to deliver them a midnight feast.